Hello, African American history students. Today we're going to talk about maps. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it helps to explain chapter one. Now, you've read chapter one, and obviously he launches into what is the first racist, who was the first racist and what racism truly means. But it's important to understand where racism is truly uh, shall we say, earned, if you will, or where it derives from, what it really comes from. And this is where Kendi and I would probably disagree a little bit. And Kendi is very well researched, and I'll probably defer to him in the long run. But maps can help a great deal to understand why there is a great disconnect in our thinking. Now, first things first, where does slavery come from? Okay, where does this idea of slavery come from? Because that's really what kind of informs our study of this part of the history. In reality, the justification towards slavery, and in this case, African slavery, is going to come from the Bible of all places. And it's actually going to come from the Old Testament Jewish text to explain it. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the curse of Ham. Okay. But if you read Genesis, this is in Genesis chapter 9, 18 through 29. In Genesis chapter 9, it's, of course, the story of the sons of Noah. Okay. So this is after Noah's ark. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay. Ham was the father of Canaan. Okay, Canaan was the area just north of what is today uh, Israel. So places like Syria, Lebanon, places like that. Okay, these were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, a proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside of his tent. Okay, so this is back in the day considered to be unclean, to be naked for those to see, if you will. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, and they walked in backward to cover their father's naked body, their faces turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. The lowest of slaves will be to his brothers. He will be to his brothers." Okay. He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years, and then he died. Okay, so breaking this down to understand this passage has been interpreted wrongly, I might add, in world studies over and over again. And here's where they basically come to. These three individuals are going to be the first in a long lineage that are going to create three separate and distinct cultures, at least when it comes to this story. What it's going to grow and interpret is that Shem is going to be the father of all Israelites. Okay, so out of the Jewish faith, the Israeli group is going to be the followers or the descendants of Shem. Japheth is going to be the people that eventually people Anatolia, Greece. They're going to basically populate Europe. So the Europeans that are going to come out of this, and by extension, the Christians, are going to be Japheth's, kind of followers, if you will. And then Ham, even though he is somebody that is north of what eventually becomes Israel, eventually through an amalgamation of all kinds of craziness, they're going to shove him down into Africa. They're going to basically say that these people are shoved down into Africa and that they get dark skin because of their curse. Now, anywhere in there did it say that Noah said, "And you will be cursed with dark skin"? No. Anywhere in there that he said, you will wear the mark? No, you're not going to be marked in some way, shape, or form. But this is what racism does. It fills in the blanks to explain why there are differences between cultures, differences between people, and they blame it on something that already exists. Okay. And this is kind of what Kendi is talking about, that Racism doesn't germinate from things that already exist, where you have a situation and then you slowly extend out and racism occurs. It's racism is already there, and then you use whatever you can to justify it. Okay, use something that is already there, turn and twist its meaning, and this is certainly one of them. Now, this is where you can start to kind of piece together how, in rhetoric, in the writing, slavery has been justified, racism has been justified, and of course the Bible's been utilized. Of course, the writings of people like Aristotle, Plato, all of these Greek thinkers, Ibn Battuta, who is a Muslim philosopher and great thinker, traveler, if you will, Marco Polo, who eventually is going to come on the scene in the 1200s, if you will, telling stories of the Middle East and all these different cultures and everything. All of these thinkers are going to put out all kinds of information about races. And it's just going to be accepted because at that time, people didn't travel all that much. And if they did travel, it was usually for something crazy like a war or some sort of religious trek, if you will. So let's kind of point out that maps can teach us a great deal of why we don't know certain things about culture. Okay, so let's start with the Roman Empire. Okay, the Roman Empire, and in this case, we're talking about the Roman Empire in 117 AD. So we're talking about 117 years after the theoretical birth of Christ. Okay, so we're talking about, in reality, less than 100 years after the death of Christ. Okay, so for those of you that are not really well versed in biblical teachings, Jesus was born theoretically at the turn between BC, before Christ, and Anno Domini, after God, if you will. Okay, so he was born, for lack of better terminology, at 0, and then lived to be 33, at least if we're following the general practice of the Bible. Okay, so 33 AD is theoretically when Jesus was crucified. So we're talking about less than 100 years after that. This is the grandest extent of the Roman Empire. So the Romans basically had what were known as imperial provinces and senatorial provinces. So these are the ones run by the Roman Senate, okay? The pink areas. What is eventually going to be Italy? Obviously, this is where the Romans kind of had their base of operation in Rome, okay? They had taken over Greece down here, which is termed Macedonia here. Okay, this is the Greek Isles right here. This is what is today Turkey, okay? This area right along North Africa here would be the northern reaches of Egypt, okay, and obviously over here as well, where the Nile River is, but it extends out towards Tunisia, what is today Tunisia, Algeria, places like that, Libya, and then, you have areas down in here that are, what is today currently in modern day Spain. All of that is run by the Romans. But then you have territories that are kind of run by the Roman military, if you will, and the locals, if you will. And you're talking about northern European regions that are currently places like France and Germany, all the way up into Great Britain. They never managed to get to the Scots. The Scots are very proud of that. So if you ever go to Scotland, you're going to see a lot of people say we kept the Romans out. Obviously, most of Spain, and then, of course, the Middle East. I mean, they just dominated the Middle East. And, of course, down in, if you see where Judea is, that is where modern-day Israel is. Okay, and that would have been, as you can see, down here, you can see kind of Syria and Arabia and all these areas. Those areas were where Christ would have lived and would have walked and, would have been crucified, if you will. So this is after the crucifixion. This is the very early stages of Christian dogma. That Christianity really doesn't come as a major world religion for another couple of hundred years, really. But at this point, the Romans can teach us a great deal about how Africa is ignored, because you will notice this area down underneath where they control in Africa. Africa is a very large continent. Why is it they never went inland? Well, part of it is this area right in here would be the Sahara Desert. So crossing the Sahara would have been a massive undertaking at that point, and they never managed to do it. So the geography of Africa actually kept most of Africa away from Roman influence and away from Roman dominance. So that kind of goes a long way to understanding that most of Rome is going to be kept in the dark, quite literally, about Africa. and their only real understanding of the region is going to come from traders. It's going to come from people that are going through the crossroads of the world, which is over here in what is today Israel, Saudi Arabia, places like that, because that's really the link. That's where these trading routes are going to be, all along the Mediterranean. But are they really going to know what's happening down in modern day Kenya or South Africa? They're not. They don't have that kind of reach. They don't have that kind of understanding. So it's not a surprise that later on, about 1,000 years later, when we're fighting the Crusades, we can always kind of tell a little bit about European domination, European Eurocentric thinking, when we look at crusade maps. Because if you see over here, it says the first crusade, went overland. Okay, the first crusade went overland, over what is today northern Italy, through Switzerland, all the way through the Balkans, all the way through, the Greek Isles, if you will, through Turkey and into the Holy Land. Okay, and again, it was a fight between the Christians and between the Christians and the Muslims for control of the Middle East. Okay, you can see the green lines all in this area right in here, that they went overland and ended up kind of bogged down in what is today Turkey. The Third Crusade actually used the Mediterranean, right? The Fourth Crusade kind of used a little bit of both, went through land and water routes. But you will notice that at no point did they cut through North Africa. Now, why is it that they didn't cut through North Africa? Well, it's because they would have had to go through territories that were Muslim controlled. These were all Muslim kingdoms, and none of these would have been safe passage routes for any of these crusaders to go over and fight, even though these Muslims were not really on the side of the Muslims that were controlling the Middle East. They would have never given safe passage to the Christians. So sure enough, do the Christians really have an understanding of any of these caliphates as they were known back in the day? They do not. Okay. And the other thing that we can also garner from that is that during that same time that you have all these crusades going on, there's a reason why you don't see any land routes going through what is today modern day Spain and Portugal. Why? They were going through at the exact same time another crusade that really isn't talked about all that much. When you hear crusades, most people think about, oh, well, it was the fight for the Holy Land. It was the fight to get Jerusalem back for the Christians. There was another crusade in Spain called the Reconquista. And in Spain, and this map isn't the greatest, but it's this area over here being depicted, okay? This area, this area right in here kind of shows you that from the turn of the millennium, if you will, in 1000, all the way up to 1492, which should kind of ring a bell for most average historians here, Spain is being taken over and reconquered by the Christians. Okay, from France, from England, whatever else, they're coming in and they're helping out Navarre, Castile, okay, Aragon, and these names, if you remember, Ferdinand of Aragon, Isabel of Castile, these are smaller kingdoms of what eventually will become the full Spain, and they are fighting right now to get rid of the Moors. Okay, the Moors were Muslim invaders from North Africa. They were black. Okay, these were African people who were Muslim, and they were way more advanced as a culture than the Spaniards were, the Castilians, the Aragons, the Navarre. That none of those guys really understood mathematics. The Muslims did. They had invented the concept of zero. They had invented numeric equations. They were very learned scholars. Okay, not all of them, obviously, but their culture was way more advanced. The Spanish basically joined forces with all these barbaric tribes, all these people from England and France and whatever else, to try and push them out in the name of God. And that was called the Reconquista. And of course, as soon as they conquer this, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term Inquisition, they immediately turn on anybody that is left behind, whether it be Muslims, Jews, whoever is not Catholic is going to be either killed, imprisoned, expelled from the country, whatever. Because, and I know this is going to sound like a foreign concept nowadays, but Spain is making Spain great again. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to cleanse the whole country for the true Spaniards, if you will. And the Reconquista is a very, very deadly, very, they're not interested in human rights. It's a really dark time in Spanish history. But again, they kind of frame it as, well, we were getting rid of the outside invaders who had come across the Gibraltar Strait, okay, Strait of Gibraltar. Okay. Now, right after that, if you remember from your world history, they started doing exploring. Okay, the age of exploration starts in 1492. 1492 should ring a bell because 1492 was when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, before that, even before that happened, Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, is already expensing all these voyages, trying to get people to travel and make contact with new trade routes. Now, the main trade routes were through the Mediterranean, but why is it that the Portuguese are starting to sail all the way around Africa to go over to India for spices and other things? You'll notice that they do stop in places along the way. There are trading posts along the coastline of Africa, but they're not going through Africa. Well, first of all, it's because Africa is a very large continent. Second of all, the land routes are not the easiest in the world. There are dense jungles. There are deserts. I mean, it's a very diverse continent when it comes to geography. There are mountains. There's rivers all over the place. It's just a very tough continent, and they had not explored it very much. So all they were doing were using trading posts along the coastline of Africa and not really going in depth into Africa. So still, what do we gain out of this? After all this time where they are learning about spices over in India, where they are learning about the Holy Land over in the Middle East, and they know who these people are. They know from these trade routes exactly who they're dealing with. They're still believing that the people of Africa are a cursed people from the biblical teachings and interpretations of people who, like St. Augustine, start making claims about this. They're using their Greek and their Roman texts from this. They even have somebody named Leo Africanus, who is Leo the African, who is a slave who is rescued when he comes up through what is today Italy. He's rescued by the Pope. The Pope basically, for lack of better terminology, buys him and then sets him free and converts him to Catholicism. And he basically becomes a cardinal, and he starts telling his life story, but he tells his life story as if he's been rescued by these wonderful people in the north from these savage brutes that he came from down in Africa. So he almost informs the Catholic faith and, of course, the Western world as it's known, about these African savages that, were all kinds of, deviants and criminals and whatever else. So sure enough, they take it as biblical truth that Africa must be this backwards place that, is filled with people that are sexual beasts and criminal in nature and whatever else. And it's one of those situations where somebody's like, well, if the African is saying that that's really what happened, then that must be the truth. That must be how it happened. And so why is it that these places are getting these bad raps as people? It's because of these trade routes that aren't really getting a true, full picture of these people. But it's also because you have people informing that really aren't all that informed, and they're making generalizations even of their own people. Okay. And of course, the age of exploration shows that even when Spain starts traveling as well, Spain starts going over to the New World. Spain starts settling the West Indies after Columbus comes over. The Portuguese and the Spanish continually go over to India. Then they explore China. They even use some land routes to get out to Mongolia and China and other places out in this area. But they're not going down into Africa. They're not exploring anything down here. So the age of exploration leaves out Africa entirely almost, except for the minor exception of trading posts, which also deal in slaves. The African people, along these trade routes in Mali, in places like modern day Kenya, they already had slavery as part of their culture. And they basically were trading, and their slaves, at least at that point, for most of them, not all, but for most of them, these were people that were captured in tribal wars. If I captured a slave, they worked for me. If I captured somebody, they worked for me as a slave. some of these tribes realized they could make a lot of money, and they could get a lot of European goods and other things by trading with these European explorers, giving them their slaves in exchange for guns, in exchange for food sources, whatever the case may be. They were doing that. And so the modern slave trade is established predominantly by the Portuguese, which is why Kendi makes the argument in Stamped that, obviously the first racist, if you will, would be somebody from Portugal that justifies what they were doing. Okay, that's where that comes from. And of course, a clearer map here where you're talking about the English, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, all going out and settling and exploring. Where are they exploring? You can see it a little bit clearer. They're exploring the modern day Philippines. They're exploring over in China, India. They're going all the way across the Pacific Ocean. They're looking into South America. They're looking into North America. But what's the one place that doesn't have any arrows on it? Africa. So do they really understand? We're talking about from the time period of Jesus's birth and death all the way up to 1490 and 1500, where they're not even exploring the continent. They're not even making contact. They're not making inroads into understanding. So you're talking about 1500 years of assumptions. You're talking about 1500 years of ignorance. And so how easy would it be for somebody to say, hey, here's Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 through 29, and Ham is the slave to the Europeans and to the Israelis. Africa's it. Africa already has the slave trade. God must have made them slaves. Therefore, it's okay. So this is what Kendi's talking about. The racism already existed. The ignorance already existed. They utilized the documents. They utilized what they knew, or more importantly, did not know, to justify their actions. And that's kind of the whole point, that maps can kind of teach us a little bit about the reality, about what is really true about this time period and all the things that were happening in regards to in regards to the people at this time period, in regards to what was happening with slavery. It goes a long way to explain how one group of people can be forced into slavery because of an assumption made by another group of people and an opportunity provided by another group of people that just creates this giant monster. So what I mean by that, sorry to get a little misguided here, but if you've got Europeans that really don't understand who Africans are and are making assumptions based upon biblical text and other teachings from philosophers, and we're talking about Muslim philosophers, we're talking about European philosophers, we're talking about Middle Eastern philosophers, all of these people are kind of saying that, hey, these are the people that should be subjugated based upon this, curse of Ham philosophy, which is really more of a justification. And then you also have the fact that these people have already set up a slave trade down in Africa in their own regards. And it's merely an extension. The international slave trade is merely an extension of what they're already doing tribally. They're taking 2 and 2 and making 4. They're saying, all right, we have this assumption about these people. We have the biblical teachings about these people. We have all these philosophies, and we're adding them to the fact that they already have the slavery working in their own favor. And keep in mind, it's not like there wasn't slavery in other locations. Okay, Egypt had slavery. The Eastern Europeans had slavery. What is today Serbia and Montenegro and places like that. There was slavery existing there. What is today Russia had slavery. Serfdom kind of gets born out of that. So slavery exists as a concept, but there's a difference. Obviously, and keep in mind the European discoverers are going to enslave the natives as well. So all of that is going to be part of this. Okay, it's certainly going to be part of this. What you need to understand is that it's ignorance that really kind of feeds it. It feeds the beast. And we can tell a lot based upon maps about how certain regions are ignored and sometimes how certain regions are just basically blamed for things. So that's kind of how we're starting off. Okay. Now, that's the session for today. I don't want to get too bogged down. If you have any questions, obviously reach out. There will be an assignment associated with Chapter 1. Next week, you need to read Chapter 2 in Stamped. So if you haven't read Chapter 1, please get on it. Chapter 2 needs to be read by next week's remote learning day. We will have a class session next week, so please be prepared for that, and make sure, again, that you have read Chapter 2. Again, there will be an assignment for Chapter 1. Please keep an eye out for that. So you complete that assignment this week. You had a Flipgrid due Tuesday, which I'm recording this right now. It is Tuesday, but tomorrow it will be considered late, so please make sure that you record your Flipgrid on your influences. If you have questions on any of that or anything else, please reach out through office hours or through email at your convenience. Have a good day, folks. Stay safe, stay healthy.